A billionaire thought he had everything money could buy until a waitress crawling on the floor with his son showed him what true wealth really is. It was one of those mornings when the city looked the same as always: busy streets, cars rushing by, people hurrying toward their destinations. But inside the black car with tinted windows, life felt completely different. A billionaire. Father sat silently with his young son beside him. The man was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his watch shining faintly in the sunlight. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, yet there was a certain coldness in his eyes. His son, on the other hand, was restless, small legs swinging as he tried to fight the boredom that always came with being around his father. The man usually preferred expensive clubs and private lounges, places where people bowed to him and treated him like royalty. But that day, for some reason even he couldn't explain, he ordered the driver to stop at a small family diner on the corner of an old street. It was not the kind of place where billionaires ate. The walls were painted with fading colors, the neon sign above the door blinked unevenly, and the smell of fried food escaped through the cracks. Still, he walked in, holding his son's hand, ignoring the surprised stares of the regulars who wondered why someone like him was there. The waitress who approached them had a smile that looked worn but genuine. Her uniform was clean but old, and her shoes looked like they had been through far too many shifts. She carried a notepad in one hand, balancing plates in the other as she moved quickly from one table to the next. Life had clearly not been easy for her, yet she moved with determination. When she reached their table, she gave the father a polite nod and leaned slightly toward the boy, asking what he wanted to eat in a soft, playful tone that instantly caught his attention. The father ordered something simple, though he usually preferred exotic dishes prepared by private chefs. His son picked at the menu with excitement, pointing to pancakes and chocolate milk. The waitress scribbled it all down and hurried away, leaving the boy bouncing in his seat while his father sat still, scrolling through his phone. Minutes passed, and the boy's excitement faded into restlessness. He pulled out a small toy car from his pocket, a shiny red one, and began rolling it across the table. His father glanced up for a second but didn't say anything. Soon the car slipped from the boy's hand and fell under the table. The boy immediately bent down, crawling under the booth to search for it. His father sighed, clearly annoyed at the sight of his child on the floor of a diner. At that exact moment, the waitress returned with plates balanced carefully on her tray. She noticed the boy crouching beneath the table, his small fingers feeling around for the toy. Without hesitation, she set the plates down and knelt beside the booth. She got down on her knees and looked under the table, her ponytail falling over her shoulder. "Lose something?" she asked gently. The boy looked up, his face lighting up as if he had just found a new friend. "My car," said with urgency. The waitress smiled and crawled under the table beside him. To anyone else, it might have looked silly, maybe even inappropriate, but to the boy, it was magical. Here was an adult, someone he had just met, willing to play his game without any hesitation. Together, they searched the dark floor, her hand brushing against dust, until she found the small red car hiding in the corner. "Found it," she whispered, holding it up like treasure. The boy squealed with joy, hugging the toy as though it had been gone for years. But instead of standing up right away, the waitress stayed down there, pretending to drive the car along the floor, making small engine noises that made the boy burst into laughter. His giggles filled the entire booth, drawing stares from nearby tables. The billionaire father, who had been watching quietly, felt his jaw tighten. He wasn't used to this someone crawling on the floor with his son like an equal. Not a nanny, not a tutor, not someone paid to keep the boy entertained, but just a waitress in an old uniform who had no reason to care. At first he felt almost offended. Didn't she realize who he was? Didn't she understand the kind of respect he usually commanded? But then his eyes fell on his son, and he froze. The boy wasn't just smiling. He was laughing in a way his father hadn't seen in a very long time, loud, unrestrained, completely genuine. The kind of laugh that didn't come from expensive toys or elaborate vacations, but from something simple and real. It was so foreign to the father that he didn't know whether to interrupt or stay quiet. He leaned back in his seat, watching the scene unfold as if it belonged to someone else's life. The waitress continued to play, moving the car in circles, pretending it crashed into her hand, making exaggerated sounds that only made the boy laugh harder. When she finally crawled back out and returned to standing, her face was slightly flushed from embarrassment, but she smiled as though she didn't regret it one bit. "Sorry about that," she said lightly, brushing off her knees. "Couldn't let him lose his favorite car?" The father didn't answer immediately. His eyes studied her, curious now rather than irritated. He had lived in a world where people treated his son like porcelain, where every action was calculated, polite, and distant. But here was someone who simply got on the floor without thinking twice, just to make a child happy. It confused him, even unsettled him. The boy climbed back into his seat, clutching the car tightly. "She's funny, Daddy," he declared proudly. "Can we come here every day?" The father raised an eyebrow, his lips parting as though he wanted to correct him, but the words didn't come. The boy's eyes sparkled in a way that made silence easier than explaining why they probably wouldn't come back. Their food arrived, and while the boy dug into his pancakes, the father found himself glancing at the waitress more often than he cared to admit. She moved quickly, delivering plates to other tables, balancing refills, and offering warm smiles to people who barely noticed her effort. There was nothing glamorous about her job, nothing extraordinary on the surface, but there was something about the way she carried herself that left an impression. He caught himself thinking about how different she was from the women in his world, those who wore designer clothes, diamonds on their wrists, and never bent down for anyone. She didn't know who he was, or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, she had broken through the cold wall he had built around himself without even realizing it. As they finished their meal, the boy kept glancing around, hoping to catch her eye again. Every time she walked past, he waved his toy car at her, as if to show her he hadn't lost it again. She responded each time with a playful smile, and a boy would giggle before returning to his pancakes. The father said little during the meal, but his silence wasn't the same as before. It wasn't distant or distracted. It was thoughtful, something about the moment, something as small as a waitress crawling on the floor with. His son had unsettled his carefully ordered life. He wasn't sure yet if he liked it, but he couldn't deny that it had left a mark on him. When they finally stood to leave, the boy clung to his father's hand, pouting. "Can we come back tomorrow?" he begged. The father didn't answer. Right away, he looked back once more at the waitress, who was busy at another table, laughing softly with an elderly couple. There was a warmth in her that was rare in his world, a warmth he couldn't buy no matter how much money he had. As they stepped out of the diner, the boy tugged his father's hand again, repeating the question. This time, the billionaire only gave a faint smile, saying nothing. But the thought stayed in his mind longer than he expected. Something had begun that day, though he didn't yet understand what. After that first unexpected encounter, the billionaire found himself thinking about the diner more often than he wanted to admit. At first, he convinced himself it was only for his son. The boy had been so happy there, laughing freely in a way money had never bought, and the father wanted to see that joy again. But as the days passed, he realized the truth. Part of him returned because of her. The waitress, with her worn uniform and gentle smile, had unknowingly captured his attention. His son began asking about the diner every morning. "Daddy, can we go today? Can we see her again?" The boy's eyes sparkled with hope, and the father, who was usually rigid and precise about schedules, found it impossible to say no. So, they went back. Each visit became a small ritual. The billionaire would sit quietly observing, while his son bounded toward her the moment she appeared. Clutching the little red car he had dropped before, the waitress greeted them as if no one else existed. She knelt down to speak to the boy, asking questions in a soft, playful voice. She didn't act afraid of him or deferential. She treated him like a child she genuinely cared about. She joked with him, teased him lightly, even let him climb onto her lap for a brief moment while she helped him finish a drawing he had started on a napkin. The billionaire watched silently, unsure why he was fascinated by these small interactions. He had seen countless children in his life, many surrounded by wealth, attention, and tutors. But none of them laughed like his son did here. He began asking her questions, casually at first about her life. She answered honestly. She told him she had grown up in a small town and that her parents had died when she was young. She had siblings, and it had been her responsibility to care for them. She worked double shifts at the diner to help pay for their schooling and keep food on the table. She didn't complain, she didn't ask for help, and she rarely let her exhaustion show. Her voice carried a quiet strength that drew the billionaire in. Though he didn't want to admit it, he listened without judgment, even when her stories made him feel uneasy. She was a world away from his own life, a world without money, without privilege, a life filled with responsibility and sacrifice. Yet there was a beauty to her resilience, a warmth he hadn't realized he had been missing. Watching her interact with his son, he began to see the simple things he had long ignored. Genuine laughter, unforced smiles, and acts of kindness without expectation. One day, as they sat eating pancakes, the billionaire noticed something that made his chest tighten. The boy was telling the waitress a story about school, gesturing wildly with his hands. And she was listening intently, nodding, asking questions, and laughing at all the right moments. She wasn't impressed by wealth, and she didn't care about his power or title. She treated his son like any other child. And for the first time, he saw his son light up not because of toys or expensive lessons, but because someone simply cared. The billionaire felt a strange mix of emotions. He was proud, almost startled, at how much his son had connected with her. He was curious, wanting to understand this woman who could touch lives without needing anything in return. And somewhere, deep down, he felt something unfamiliar stirring admiration. Perhaps even longing. He pushed it away at first, telling himself it was foolish to be interested in someone from a world so far removed from his own. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. Each visit revealed more layers. He learned that she had dreams beyond the diner, small ones, like saving enough to take her siblings on a trip or finishing her own education. He noticed how careful she was with her money, how selfless she was with her time, and how she always tried to lift the spirits of those around her even when she herself was tired. He remembered his late wife, the way she had lived, giving without expectation, loving deeply. The waitress reminded him of those memories he had tried to bury. Memories that were painful but also filled with warmth. One afternoon, as they were leaving the diner, the boy tugged at her sleeve and asked, "Will you come play with me again tomorrow?" She smiled, a bit hesitant, but nodded. The billionaire watched from the doorway, his son's small hand in hers, and realized something. The joy he saw in his son could not be bought, it could not be planned, and it could not be taught. It had to be earned through genuine connection. Through care and through presence, the billionaire began to understand that. Wealth and status had created walls around his son and himself. Tutors, nannies, and luxury toys could fill time, but they could not replace love, attention, and simple moments of connection. He saw that his son's laughter, the kind that came from the heart, was priceless. And the waitress, this ordinary woman with extraordinary patience and kindness, had unlocked that laughter with nothing more than a smile and her willingness to be present. Slowly, he started visiting more often, sometimes without his son. At first, he told himself it was to check on the boy's happiness, but deep down, he knew it was more. He would sit quietly, watching her interact with customers, noticing the way she cared for them, the way she moved gracefully under pressure, and the way her eyes softened whenever she smiled. She had no idea the effect she had on him. During these visits, he began to reflect on his own life. He remembered how lonely his days often were, filled with meetings, phone calls, and obligations. That left no room for joy. He realized he had been living in a bubble of wealth, never noticing the ordinary moments that made life rich. Watching her, he saw that life could be full of laughter, love, and meaning, even without luxury. He began questioning the walls he had built around himself and wondered if he had been missing out on the things that truly mattered. Over time, he became protective of her, not in the way a man might claim ownership, but in the way someone wants to ensure that goodness and kindness are not hurt or exploited. He noticed how hard she worked, how unfair life had been to her, and he felt a strange desire to shield her from harm. For the first time, he realized that money could never replace empathy or genuine care, and he admired her resilience more than anything else he had ever witnessed. One evening, as they prepared to leave, The boy grabbed his father's hand tightly and whispered, "I like her. She's fun. She plays with me.
What?
Can we see her again tomorrow?" The billionaire knelt down, holding his son close, and for a long moment he looked at the waitress. She smiled softly at him, recognizing the unspoken bond forming between them. He nodded silently, allowing the boy to hold on to that moment, knowing that this connection was priceless and that it had the power to change everything for his family. That night, as he drove home, he reflected on the day. He realized that the waitress had done something remarkable without even trying. She had reminded him what it meant to be human, to feel joy, to connect with another person genuinely. She had shown him that love, laughter, and kindness could not be bought, but were far more valuable than anything money could offer. And the boy, his son, was already blossoming under her simple yet profound care. For the first time in a long while, he felt hope. Hope that his son could grow up happy, not just wealthy. Hope that he himself could change, could experience life beyond contracts and power. Hope that kindness, courage, and warmth could exist in a world that often ignored. Then, from that moment forward, the diner became more than a place to eat. It became a place where his son's laughter echoed freely, where the walls he had built around his heart began to crumble, and where he began to see life in a way he never had before. And though he didn't know what the future held, he knew one thing for certain: the woman who laughed on the diner floor with his son had changed something inside him forever, and he could never look at the world the same way again. The diner became a strange new habit for the billionaire. At first, he told himself it was only because his son begged for it. The boy would tug at his sleeve every morning, asking if they could go see the funny waitress. It became harder to say no each day, so he gave in. But somewhere inside, he knew it wasn't only for his son. There was something about that little diner, something about her, that kept pulling him back. Each visit began the same way. The waitress would greet them with the same warm smile, though her eyes often looked tired from long shifts. She never treated them differently from the other customers, never spoke to him with the nervous stammer that came from knowing his wealth. She talked to his son as if he were just a child, not the heir to billions. She joked with him, teased him lightly, and always found a way to make him laugh. The billionaire would sit quietly, pretending not to notice. But inside he felt something strange, something unfamiliar that stirred in him whenever she was near. Over time, he began asking her small questions. At first, they were casual. Did she'll always work at the diner? Did she go to school around here? She answered politely but honestly, never trying to impress him. She explained that she had been working there for years, ever since her parents passed away. She was the eldest of 3 siblings, and it was her responsibility to provide for them. Her younger brother was still in high school, and her sister was in college, struggling to pay tuition. The waitress had taken on double shifts, often staying until midnight, so they could have a better chance at life. The billionaire listened silently, pretending it was just conversation, but the truth was her story struck something inside him. She reminded him of someone he once knew, someone he had loved deeply. His late wife had been just like her. She had been kind, resilient, always putting others before herself. When she died suddenly, years ago, he had buried those memories, along with his heart. Since then, he had thrown himself into work and wealth, building walls around himself. But now, watching this waitress smile through her struggles, he felt those walls tremble. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he found himself driving back to the diner without even telling his driver where to go. His son was already asleep at home, but the father wanted to see the place again. He entered quietly, sitting at a booth in the corner. The waitress was there, serving a table of teenagers. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumping for just a moment when she thought no one was watching. Then she straightened up again, forcing a smile. Something about that moment, the strength it took to keep going, moved him in a way he didn't expect. When she finally reached his table, she looked surprised. "Where's your son?" she asked. "He's asleep," he replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" The question caught him off guard. No one in his world ever asked him why he did anything. They simply nodded and agreed. He opened his mouth, but no answer came. She smiled softly, shaking her head as if she already knew he didn't have one. From that night on, he began noticing little things about her. The way she tucked loose hair behind her ear when she was focused, the way she always gave extra whipped cream to children's milkshakes without charging them, the way she never complained, even when rude customers snapped at her. She lived a life completely opposite from his, yet there was something real about it. Something pure. One afternoon, while they were eating, one of his business partners happened to walk in. The man was dressed in a sharp suit, talking loudly on the phone. And when he spotted the billionaire, his eyes widened. He walked over, clapping him on the shoulder. "Of all the places to find you," the partner exclaimed with a laugh. "What are you doing here?" The billionaire gave a short, stiff smile, but before he could answer, the waitress appeared too. "Refill their drinks." She greeted them politely, her smile as warm as ever. The partner's eyes flicked from her worn uniform to the billionaire's expensive watch, and a smirk spread across his face. "Don't tell me this is why you're here," he whispered mockingly when she walked away. "A waitress? Crawling on the floor for your kid? You could have anyone you want, and you're wasting time with her." The billionaire felt something hot rise in his chest. Normally he would have brushed it off, pretended he didn't care about the opinions of others. But this time was different. The words stung, not because they insulted him, but because they insulted her. He looked his partner straight in the eye. "Careful," he said coldly. The man raised his eyebrows in surprise. He had never heard that tone from him before, usually. The billionaire was calm, detached, too powerful to show emotion. But this time, his voice carried a sharpness that left no room for laughter. The partner quickly changed the subject, though the smirk lingered on his lips as he left. The waitress returned soon after, unaware of what had been said. She carried on as if nothing had happened, but the billionaire sat there quietly, turning the moment over in his mind. For years, he had let people say what they wanted about him. He had learned not to care. But now, he found himself caring deeply, because it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her. Later that night, as he tucked his son into bed, the boy clutched his toy car and whispered, "Daddy, I like her. She's nice. She laughs with me." The billionaire stroked his son's hair, realizing how true those words were. The boy didn't care about her uniform, her job, or her struggles. He only cared about how she made him feel happy, safe, loved. And wasn't that what truly mattered? For the first time in years, the billionaire lay awake in his large, empty bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Memories of his wife surfaced, her laughter, her kindness. The way she had once played with their son in the garden before her illness took her away. He had locked those memories away, convinced they only brought pain. But now they returned, not with sorrow, but with warmth. The waitress had unknowingly opened a door he thought was sealed forever. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how much his life had been ruled by money. Every decision, every relationship, every moment had been influenced by wealth. But here was someone who had nothing, yet gave everything. She didn't ask for his attention, didn't seek his approval. She simply lived her life full of struggles and sacrifices, but with a strength that made her shine brighter than anyone in his glittering world. It frightened him to admit it, but he admired her more than he had admired anyone in a very long time. The billionaire's life had always been built on appearances. Every move he made was watched, every dinner he attended was whispered about, and every choice was measured by people who never cared about him as a man, only as a symbol of wealth and power. For years, he played along with the rules because that was the world he belonged to. But lately, he felt those rules pressing against him like iron chains. And it all began because of one woman in an old uniform at a diner who made his son laugh. The gossip started sooner than he expected. He heard whispers at a business lunch, caught the smirks of men in tailored suits, and noticed the raised eyebrows of women dressed in silk gowns. People wondered why he, a man of such status, was wasting time in a small diner. Some even dared to ask directly, though always with fake politeness. He didn't answer them. Still, their voices echoed in his ears. Long after the conversations ended, at home, his family lawyer came to see him. The man was sharp and practical, the kind of person who always thought about image, contracts, and consequences. He closed the office door behind him and sat down, his eyes serious. "You've been seen," the lawyer said. "Several times. At that diner? So what?" The billionaire replied, pretending to be unmoved. The lawyer leaned forward. "You know how this looks? Associating with a waitress? If the press picks it up, it won't be flattering. Investors don't like distractions. It could harm your reputation. It could even hurt your business." The billionaire didn't answer. He only stared at the lawyer, his jaw tightening. Once, he would have agreed. Once, he would have avoided anything that could tarnish his perfect image. But now, the warning only filled him with irritation. The lawyer kept talking, going on about risks and scandal, but the billionaire's mind drifted. He saw the waitress's face in his thoughts. Saw her kneeling on the diner floor with his son. Saw her laugh through her exhaustion. Reputation suddenly felt meaningless compared to that image. When the lawyer finally left, the billionaire sat alone in the quiet of his study. His hand rested on a photograph of his late wife, still framed on the desk. She had never cared about appearances either. She had been like the waitress in many ways, kind, unafraid, full of warmth. He wondered what she would say if she were here. He knew the answer. She would tell him to follow his heart, not the voices of people who didn't matter. Meanwhile, the waitress had her own battles. She noticed the billionaire's visits becoming more frequent, and though she was glad for the little boy's company, she began to worry. She didn't want to be seen as a charity project. She didn't want him to pity her or think of her as an escape from his empty, glittering world. She was proud of the life she had built, even if it was hard. She had no desire to be pulled into a storm of gossip and judgment. One evening after another busy shift, she sat at the counter, counting her tips. Her hands were sore, her back ached, and she longed for rest. But her mind wandered to him, the man who sat quietly at her tables, watching with thoughtful eyes. She didn't understand why he came back again and again. She didn't know what he wanted, and deep down, she was afraid of what it might mean if she let herself care. The turning point came unexpectedly. The billionaire had been away for a few days, busy with meetings and travel. During that time, his son grew restless. The boy didn't care about fancy toys, big houses, or endless luxuries. He wanted to see the waitress. He wanted to laugh with her again. Each day he asked when they were going back to the diner, and each day his father said, "Soon." But soon was not enough. One afternoon, while the nanny was watching him, the boy decided to take matters into his own hands. He slipped out of the house unnoticed, his little feet carrying him down the street. He remembered the way to the diner, remembered the sign and the smell of food, remembered the laughter. When the nanny realized he was gone, panic spread through the house. Calls were made, alarms were raised, and finally the father himself was told. His heart pounded as he raced through the streets, his car cutting through traffic. Fear gripped him in a way he hadn't felt since his wife's death. The thought of losing his son was unbearable. When he finally reached the diner, he spotted the boy through the glass window, sitting at the counter with his toy car, laughing. As the waitress poured him a glass of milk, the father burst through the door, his face pale with both anger and relief. The boy turned and waved happily. "Daddy, I found her. Look." For a moment, the billionaire could only stand there, frozen. His son had run away, not to escape, not to hide, but to find joy, to find the one person who gave him what money could not. And in that instant, the truth hit him harder than any business loss or public scandal ever could. His son didn't need more wealth. He needed love. He needed real connection. He needed the laughter of someone who cared. The waitress looked at him nervously, unsure if she had done something wrong. But the billionaire's anger melted into something else entirely. He crossed the room, lifted his son into his arms, and held him tightly. Then he looked at her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "Thank you," he said simply. The boy clung to his father's neck, whispering, "I just wanted to see her, Daddy. Please don't be mad." The billionaire kissed the top of his son's head. "I'm not mad," he whispered back. "Not anymore." That night, after the boy was safely home, the billionaire sat in silence, thinking about what had happened. All the warnings, the gossip, The judgment hit no longer mattered. His son's happiness was worth more than every dollar in his bank account. The choice was clear now. For too long, he had lived for appearances, letting other people's opinions control his life. But now, he would live for what truly mattered. For the first time in years, he felt certain of his path. Though it terrified him, it also made him feel more alive than he had in a very long time. The decision was not something he announced with fanfare. There was no meeting, no statement, no prepared speech. It happened quietly, inside his heart, when he realized that his son's smile meant more than every headline or business deal. For too many years, he had lived for the approval of people who didn't even matter. All he wanted was to see his little boy happy. And that happiness seemed to bloom every time the waitress was near. The next time they went to the diner, something felt different. He didn't sit stiffly in the booth, pretending he was only there for the food. He didn't keep his eyes glued to his phone to avoid admitting he cared. Instead, he looked around, noticing the chatter of families, the smell of fresh coffee, and the sound of forks clinking against plates. It was a world so ordinary, so far from his polished life, and yet he felt strangely at peace. His son ran straight to the waitress, clutching his toy car and showing it off proudly. She knelt down, laughing as if she hadn't seen him in years. The boy tugged her sleeve and begged her to sit with them just for a moment. Normally, she would have refused. Customers were not supposed to invite staff to sit. But this time, she glanced at the father. He nodded silently, giving her permission. So she slid into the booth beside the boy. And for the first time, their table didn't feel like a business transaction. It felt like a family. They ate together, laughed together, and talked about little things that had nothing to do with wealth or reputation. The boy told her about his favorite cartoons. She shared a story about her brother's silly pranks. The billionaire listened quietly, soaking in every word. When the meal was done, instead of leaving right away, he hesitated. Something inside told him it was time to take a step forward, cleared his throat and asked her softly if she and her siblings would like to join him and his son for a day out. He expected her to refuse. After all, why would she agree? To his surprise, she looked at him with wide eyes and nodded slowly. The day they spent together was unlike anything he had experienced in years. He took them to a park, not a private one with gates and guards, but a simple green space filled with families. His son ran across the grass with her younger brother, both laughing so hard they nearly tripped over themselves. Her sister sat on a bench with her, the two of them chatting and teasing each other while the billionaire watched from a short distance. He felt like an outsider at first, unsure how to fit into such a natural, carefree world. But when his son grabbed his hand and pulled him into the game, he let go of his hesitation. For the first time, he joined in. They spent hours there, chasing kites, eating sandwiches, and lying on the grass as the sky turned golden. The billionaire's heart felt lighter than it had in years. How he had spent so long buried under deals, contracts, and formalities. He had forgotten what laughter sounded like when it was unforced. He had forgotten the warmth of simply being around people who didn't want anything from him. That evening, as they walked home together, the boy held the waitress's hand tightly. He didn't want to let go. His face glowed with happiness. And the billionaire realized he hadn't seen him look so alive since his wife was still with them. A lump formed in his throat, but it wasn't grief. It was gratitude. It's gratitude that someone had given his son back a piece of his childhood. Of course, the outside world noticed. Its whispers grew louder. Some of his wealthy acquaintances mocked him, saying he had lowered himself. Others pretended to be concerned, warning him about people who take advantage. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care. Their words slid off him like rain. His focus was no longer on them. His focus was on the boy who laughed again, on the woman who showed him kindness without expecting anything in return, and on the feeling in his own chest that reminded him he was still human. One evening, he took a quiet walk with her after her shift ended. The city lights glowed around them, but the street they walked was calm. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then she broke the silence, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You don't have to keep coming here. Your life is big, important. Mine is small. I don't want to be some kind of story people whisper about. He stopped walking and turned to face her.
You think I care what they whisper?
He asked softly. She looked away, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. People in your world. They don't forgive things like this. They'll laugh at you. They'll laugh at me. Let them, he said firmly. They don't matter. My son matters, and you. He hesitated, the words heavy on his tongue. You matter more than you know. Her eyes met his then, searching for the truth in his face. She saw no arrogance, no games, only sincerity. It scared her, but it also warmed her heart. She nodded slowly, unable to say more. Days turned into weeks, and their bond deepened. The boy became inseparable from her, clinging to her like a second mother. The billionaire, once cold and untouchable, found himself laughing more, talking more, even smiling at strangers. The transformation did not go unnoticed. His employees whispered that he seemed lighter. His associates remarked that he looked healthier. They didn't know the reason, but he did. He no longer measured his life by the weight of his bank account or the size of his properties. He measured it by the sound of his son's laughter, the warmth of evenings spent with people who truly cared, and the feeling that he was finally, after years of emptiness, alive again. In the end, it didn't matter that the world gossiped. It didn't matter that people didn't understand. What mattered was that he had chosen differently this time. He had chosen love over appearances, kindness over status, and humanity over pride. The billionaire who once sat alone in mansions now sat in diners, parks and small living rooms filled with warmth. The man who once believed money could solve everything now understood it could never replace the simple joy of holding his son's hand while he laughed at a silly joke. The man who once built walls around his heart now let someone inside. Everything had changed, and he was glad it had.